Welcome back. I'm Gary Parr, and you are listening to Fiber Talk, the twice-weekly podcast for the needlework artist. And my guest this week from the Victorious Sampler is Thea Dueck. Thea, good to have you with us.
Good to be here. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Yeah, looking forward to this chat. You have a lot of things going on. Wow.
I like doing a lot of different things.
Yeah, that website is one packed place. That was fun to go through. Yeah.
Oh, thanks very much.
So I'm most interested because you grew up in Holland.
Yeah, I thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you learned your needlework there. Well, that immediately suggests hardanger or something related. So how did you get started? As a child from mother?
Well, I wouldn't say that, no. My mom did do some handiwork. She took one big project every winter. She said, it's cold out, so I'm going to take a big project. And then she'd crochet a bedspread or something like that. And she did one needlepoint picture with wolves, and she did one large tablecloth on cross stitch. And apparently she did that when when she was pregnant with me. So when she was expecting me, she was doing cross stitch. So I assume that's where I got it from.
Okay. Was that a typical family where needlework was, other women in the family do that, or is it not as prevalent?
In Holland, there is a great tradition of what they call merklappen, which are samplers in Dutch, and the schoolgirls were taught that, right up until my grandmother going to school. My mom did not get that kind of education, I don't think. She got more art, etc. But the household skills, required needlework. So I still got some of my grandmother's samplers that are hanging on my walls, and they were done when she was 6 and 7 in grade school. So there is a big tradition of sampler stitching in Holland.
Yeah, that's got to be treasures to have your grandmother's needlework. Wow.
Yeah, it really is. And I remember when I started to stitch seriously, and I say seriously in that I suddenly was made aware of this huge world of stitching, I remember thinking, oh, that's what my grandmother had learned. This is where it's all from. And before that, I was really a dilettante. I didn't learn a lot when I was a child from my mother. I definitely did not learn from my grandmother until I was older. But during the time that I was growing up, I did do an awful lot of embroidery, which is different than the counted work where I'm now doing. Just regular embroidery. I embroidered, on pillowcases and hankies and kind of thing. I love doing that too.
Okay. All right. So you just kind of a self-starter then?
I think mostly I'm a self-starter. I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, it's just always interesting to me how people come to it, because it seems like, obviously probably 4 out of 10 learn from their mother or their grandmother, and it was a tradition in the household through the years. But it's surprising how many people just come to it from some other way and get hooked and never give it up.
Well, the getting hooked, I think, is a real key. There's a chord that it struck in me when I was waiting for my kids to do all their little lessons, etc. And I tried various different skills, and I had lots of different options, like macrame, I think was popular when my kids were young.
Oh, boy, that was an era, wasn't it? That was a time. Boy, everybody was macrame and everything.
Yeah. And I didn't like that. There were way too many knots. And there were, I did some toll painting, which I became quite proficient at, and woodworking of any sort, like wood burning. And I did a whole bunch of crafts when my kids were young. Oh. And one day, my sister-in-law brought me to Vancouver, where there was a new store that had just opened called Dick and Jane's in Vancouver, BC. And she said, oh, you should come and have a look at it. It's really fun to go in there. Well, that was the first real counted needlework store I'd been to. And there were models on the walls of the Cricket collection and the Prairie Schooler, it was more country oriented kind of stitching. But I just went crazy. I had no idea that this is possible. right? The amount of work that was possible, and the models on the walls. I came away with a couple of $100 worth of stuff. And I guess I was about 32 around that time, and I was already in Victoria, BC by that time. And I just went to town just stitching for a few years, actually, a couple of years.
Yeah, but you had so you have an art background, or at least an art orientation, so I can see then how you would latch onto that, because it sounds like all the other attempts were some variation of art or creation or making.
Yep, I was definitely the old creative bent just never came out of me. When I was in school, in elementary school, there were contests. You know how you have contests and in your classroom, and oh, this person got a gold star for their artwork, and generally I was in that group of anything creative I love to try and do and stamp, and I don't know, there was so many things that could make things look pretty. So you're right, there's a real bent in my system. And my mom was also quite the artist.
Yeah, and you said in some of my readings here that do a lot of drawing, or did a lot of drawing. Is that pen and ink, or?
Yep, did it with pen and ink for sure. I did a lot of pointillism with pen and ink.
Oh.
And I did painting with both watercolor and oil, and later on with acrylic, which I wasn't as fond of. So there was so many different options, right, that you could do to create and to express yourself. And I was also a musical background, so that music actually took over for quite a number of years, where I sang in a choir, and so that actually really fulfilled a lot of my creative urges until needlework came along.
So yeah, all right. So you have it all going. The kids pick up on any of this, or is it just?
Yep.
Oh, did they? Oh, good for you.
Yeah, one of them's a graphic designer, and the other one's an artist. So, yep.
Oh, that gene is strong.
I guess so.
Yeah. Oh, that's great though, because so many people, their children have no interest, and they just go in a different direction. So that must be a lot of fun to get together with them and.
You're right.
And be artists.
Yeah, it is. And we do have many things in common, of course. It can sometimes lead to a little bit of misunderstanding and strife when you have similar things in your mind. But overall, I'd say they were self-starters, independent, and very creative.
Oh, that's terrific. That's just terrific. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you get hooked on this needlework. When does the designing start?
You're absolutely right. That didn't happen all at once.
Probably wasn't too hard to make that switch, I would think.
Well, that's really funny because it never occurred to me. And it's such a cute little story. I had been stitching for some time, and I showed this to my mother-in-law. Now, mother-in-laws are not necessarily the most helpful creatures at times. In other words, they want you to do it their way or whatever. And so I had been listening to some of her advice, and I thought, yeah, that's good, but no, in all various different areas. And we got along reasonably well, but I didn't, I wasn't raised by her. So the way she did things was quite different. But she did one thing that I will never stop thanking her for, which was when I brought her something that someone had designed and I had stitched. I said, look at this. Isn't this lovely? And she said, well, yeah, but if you'd just, done that yourself, you'd designed that yourself, it would have been way better. And of course, she didn't understand that, when you're following someone else's pattern, it's a beautiful feeling. It's a lovely feeling to be able to do that. And the result is a part of the technique and the craft that you bring to your stitching, right?
Right.
She wasn't seeing any of that. She was thinking, well, yeah, but if you just design it yourself, then you'd really be impressing me. That's basically how she put it. Honestly, I was so floored, and I felt insulted, and then I got mad, of course, and I said, okay, I'm going to go do that.
Yeah, that's an interesting spot to be in. Yeah, because I'm so proud of this. I worked hard on it.
Yeah.
And then somebody says, yeah, but within you is better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I'd have gone. I'd have probably got mad too.
Anyway, I got mad, and not right away, but I remember thinking, well, I got to try something. So I found a little booklet in one of the needlework stores that said, You too can design. I thought, oh, okay, I guess I can try. And there were a few little hints. And at that time, no computers, of course. And I ended up buying some graph paper at the local stationery store and just starting to do something and see if I could possibly, ink in the symbols and all those things. And I did actually create something for a friend of mine, which was a little tiny little cross stitch. It could have been more than 2 by 3 inches of her house with her white dog looking out the window. And she loved it. Like she went on and on about it. And I really got hooked then.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
when someone says that they like what you do, you kind of want to keep going, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy. Even a small thing like that, how tedious to fill in all the symbols and, oh, my.
Oh, all that hand charting I did. I think I did about 12 of my designs for Victoria's Sampler and almost 20 for the previous company that I created right after I talked to my friend. I decided that I was going to do cross stitch for the tourist market, and I called them lamppost designs because we have a lot of lampposts here in Victoria. I thought, oh, okay, I'll call it that. So I did pictures of, the local scenery, and they sold quite well. I went with my station wagon full of kits that I made on my dining room table and went all around the Vancouver Island itself and sold them in craft stores. And
So you created designs and then put the kits together so that you could go into a store and say, here's an entire package.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, there was nothing that I wouldn't do for this new thing. In fact, I hardly slept during this creative of the business side of things because that was all new too.
Yeah. Your eyes get open there when you start a business. Yeah, it's not just designing things.
No.
Yeah.
Actually, the business end of things kind of it was pushed along. In other words, I didn't have to actually do an awful lot of selling. I would show it to people and they'd say, sure, we'll try it. And then they sold. So it wasn't like I needed to become my own. I didn't have to push anyone. And that was a real blessing, because if I'd had to do that, I may not have continued. It's against my nature to push people to do things they don't want to do.
Yeah, the hard sell. Yeah, pass on that. Yeah. So you were designing these and so basically just targeting the tourist market and scenes from the place that they'd visited. And when do you branch? So you must at some point go, wait a minute, enough of this. I got to move on to something different.
Well, it's funny. I was really quite happy with it. And I think that took about 5 years of doing that. And I had my kids. They were still fairly young. And then this woman came to my door. She actually tracked me down to my address, which was on one of my kits. And she knocked out, or she rang the doorbell, and I said, yes. I didn't know who it was. This person who said, are you the lady that does the lamppost designs kits? And I was really shocked. I said, yes. She said, well, I'm going to open up a needlework store, and I would like you to give me, I don't know, she said 6 of everything. And I thought, what?
Whoa.
Biggest sale I'd ever had.
Whoa.
And so I said, well, that sounds like fun. So long story short, she actually ended up hiring me as her first employee. And we worked together to open and then further expand her needlework shop called Fancy Works in Victoria.
So was she the first one in town?
Yes, we didn't have one in Victoria at all. Well, we did have some crafts type of stores and some needlework stores, but nothing like this. This was over the top. She had some money and she invested it in everything beautiful that I've ever seen. A lot of stuff imported from the States, from Japan, etc. So I got to see hand-painted canvases. I got to see lines and lines of overdyed flosses and things that I'd never seen or been able to get before. And that's what actually got me started. I thought, oh, this is so beautiful. Look at these designs. I could do something like this.
Oh, I can imagine your feelings. Your eyes just get big and, oh boy, give me all of that. Let me see what I can do with it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And even now, my partner, Richard, he'd say, "Oh, are you going to do the toss?" In other words, I get a whole bunch of flosses together. I throw them around on my linen and I see where they land and I see how those colors go together. And then I'll start tossing them back and forth. He calls it the toss.
So that's okay. See, now this is, I've never done a floss toss. I hear people say, do a floss toss.
Oh,
So that's, I mean, yeah, I've heard of it, but I never thought to do it or even considered how it was done. So that's literally what you do is you throw a bunch of stuff down and see what looks good against the background.
well, yes, for sure. Although I've never heard the word floss toss either. Just
Oh,
so you know,
okay.
I know that I do this, and he calls it a toss, and that's why I thought, well, I guess it is a phrase, but I'd never heard it outside of him.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've heard it several times, but
Oh,
never explored to say, what do you mean by that? I just figured it was literally that. Uh, Toss the colors down and a bunch of colors that seem to be right and see what looks good.
yes, and it is. It's all a matter of feel and looks for sure. I am now much more educated when it comes to colors, but especially at the beginning, the floss toss took months. Okay. It's like, and I'm not exaggerating because it had to look just right.
Uh-huh.
And I've become a lot more adventurous, a lot less concerned that it looks right, can now be expanded in my mind. So it does take practice to do more and more of it, but it does actually work as far as a design is concerned because your colors do have to go together, but you also have to have a few other things that don't go. And the judicious use of the things that don't go is actually more important than the things that all harmonize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because not going and being and ruining the whole thing can probably happen fairly easily.
Yeah, it can, which is why you need to toss some more.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that would be fun to watch.
Mhm.
That mental process. That'd be fun to watch. All right. I learned something. See, every time I learn something.
That's good.
Yeah. So at this Fancy Works, then you're helping with customers, doing
Yes,
classes, the whole shooting match.
you got it. In fact, the helping with customers helped me a great deal too, because they very often didn't know how to substitute one thread for another. Design would call for one thread we didn't happen to have that day or whatever, or they just wanted to start from scratch. And especially in the hand painted canvases, they have guides, but they don't necessarily recommend certain threads. So I spent a long time with each customer enjoying the process of putting together colors.
Yeah, and that's that old, if you want to really learn something, teach it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they'll come up with ideas and issues that you'd never think, oh, no, I don't like that. And I'm thinking, but it goes. Why are you not liking it? So I had to accommodate and put myself in their shoes. And sometimes it wasn't, they didn't want to use too expensive threads because some of them are expensive. And sometimes they just wanted to have a certain look for another person who didn't like purple. So we've got to go to blue. There's all sorts of things that happen when you're interacting with people that don't happen when you're on your own.
Yeah, I was going to say, someone with an artistic view of the world to then have to help someone achieve their view
Mm-hmm.
has to be at times frustrating and difficult for you.
Well, it's funny that you should say frustrating and difficult because that only happened literally for about, well, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks. After that, I started taking all of their suggestions and ideas, particularly in the shop, as my limits. So I could be creative, but within limits of what they wanted. And because of that, I became more inventive rather than less.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. Okay. You turned it around then. That's good.
Had to do it because otherwise I would have had to quit. And then it became much more fun. It's the challenge now of seeing whether, you can accommodate what people want. And that has helped a great deal with my development of Victoria Sanford designs.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can do what I want, but I need to make sure that that is within the capabilities, the interest, the sensibilities of my clientele, of my stitchers. And if I didn't take them into account, I would lose touch with the very important essence of the fact that I'm doing this for other people, not just for myself.
Yeah, that's an interesting dilemma there from a designer perspective, because you know, I'm sure there are designers who say, "Hey, I create what I create. If you want to stitch it, fine. If you don't, fine." But then others, well, I want to stitch things that you like, and I enjoy making them. I like what I produce, but I also want people to be able to do them. And
yes,
interesting.
Yeah, that's right. It's a fine balance, and you know, there are times when I move more towards what I want, and that sometimes really lucks out. And suddenly people go, "Oh, that's great!" And I think the gingerbread houses were the most like that. I remember having this feeling that, oh, maybe I can create a little gingerbread house like I used to with my children before Christmas. So that was my thought. And no one had ever said anything like that to me. I didn't know whether people would like it. I just thought, I want to do it. So there was no real interaction in my mind, even with what other people might want. And that turned out to be a wonderful, lucky inspiration. But there were other designs that I thought, wow, this is really fun. I'm going to do this. And that really didn't do very well at all. So it's a hit or miss thing.
Yeah. Well, that's you know, you hear musicians, artists, you know, musical artists who, hey, I just create my music. If you don't like it, too bad. And then sometimes you'll see them realize that sooner or later, if they want to keep doing this, they actually have to bring in some money. So they might try one or two that people actually want to listen to. And
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, the customer always being right is not quite the case, but definitely you've got to have the interaction, the communication, the customer in mind, the stitcher in mind. Otherwise, you don't have a business. You have art.
Yes. Starving artist.
Starving artist. Sometimes.
That's right. Yeah. So this is neat then. So working at the store there, you really took that and used that as your own educational tool.
Very well put. Yes. Good way of putting it. And I think that I did that for about eight years until the Victoria Sampler started to develop to the point where I could rely on it for our income.
Mm-hmm. So how does that start? Is that designs on the side that you were able to sell in the shop and it just kind of build up?
Yeah, I designed my first little design. I think it's called Friendship Tree for a EGA. No, it wasn't EGA, EAC, which is Embroiderers Guild of Canada, a big general seminar meeting. And I was teaching there and I brought this free design for everyone. And no sooner had that all gone out in their goodie bags than I saw people stitching them. Like they were walking along, actually stitching my little things. We had it at the University of Victoria campus, and they brought them out. They brought them out in the class that I was teaching. They brought them out to stitch that instead of the thing I was teaching.
Oh my!
I thought, oh, maybe that's a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so that little design plus another couple were brought to the attention of some American needlework stores. I mean, the Canadian ones here around Victoria and Vancouver already knew of me, but the American stores hadn't really heard of what I was doing. But there were some American people that came up to our needlework store, to Fancy Works, bought their things, met me, saw some of my original, work on the walls, and told some other people. In fact, I think it was Kathy Ray at Needle in a Haystack in California who was the first person to contact me and say, do you have any more of those white Christmas patterns? And I said, yes. And then she ordered a bunch, and then other stores started ordering as well.
That's the one, the white Christmas that kind of triggered things?
Yeah, it kind of took off. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. What's that like to see people stitching your designs? What does that do to you? Get your heart racing, want to go over and talk to them about it? What happens to you when you see that?
It's a very good question. You have good questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Gary. Well, what happens to anyone when someone admires what you've done? And generally speaking, when people are stitching your design, you feel that they like what you've done. So that is a very heartwarming thing. But I never took it like, this is a good sign for, I'm going to be able to do this forever. I never went further than that. It's not in my nature to extrapolate, huge success from small increments. And this business was built on very small increments of success. So from my point of view, it was like someone saying, you're such a nice person, or how lovely of you to bring me something that I enjoy. So from that angle, it was just a wonderful, warm, complimentary, and comforting feeling that I wasn't doing it for nothing, which is often how I feel or how I felt that I was doing this. I think you'll find that my coworkers will say, yep, Thea doesn't have very much confidence that other people will continue to buy their thing. It was always a surprise to me.
Yeah. Well, it must be just at some point when you see people doing your designs, exciting.
Totally.
I'd want to go over and sit down with them and talk to them about it.
Yeah, no, there wasn't that for me. No, I guess that once I've done a design, I'm done.
Oh, okay.
So what I like is to see people doing something different with one of my designs. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. I love seeing that because I'm always looking for the new, I think. So once I've actually created the design, I have really sweated over this thing, and I really have done the best that I could at the time. You can always improve later, but at the time, that's what I've produced. And when other people take that and create something for themselves, it's their process and their enjoyment. And I love hearing how much they enjoyed this or that and what they've done here to make it easier. Those are great comments, but I'm not looking to see whether or not I get any other kind of feedback. The main thing I love is when they change the design to suit themselves.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever gone back to your designs and said, hey, I'm going to take another run at this because I think I can do better, different. I have an inspiration that I want to do a new version of this?
Depends on whether that design was already published. If it was already published, it has had its chance.
Okay.
Now I have republished things at times, and it could be that, but I take a different picture, but no, I don't usually go back. Like I said, I'm done. But what's interesting is that before I'm done, I will take a run at 2 or 3 different ways of approaching the project that I want to make.
Oh, okay. So that process is built into what you do then. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So for instance, I'm just making a little free pattern for our Victoria Sampler Facebook chat group. And in there we do kind of stitch-alongs with these little free patterns that I create. Mm-hmm. So I publish a mystery part of that free pattern once a week for about 4 weeks. And people love it because they get to stitch a little portion of it and it doesn't interfere with their regular stitching at all. But we all enjoy the creative aspect of things because I don't give them any directions or colors.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
So they get to, explore. So I was just creating a fall needle pocket that you can hang around your neck, and it's like a name tag for when you go to a retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And the name tag itself was a great idea. Making it into a pocket is up to them, whether they do it or they don't do it. But I thought, okay, well, make a space for their name that they can put in their names. And then now I have 3 different pockets sitting here, and I'm deciding between the 3 of them.
Okay. And that seems to be on your website. Do I read it right that you have a finish in mind when you design? Because do you see a design as a pin cushion or a framed piece, or do you just let that happen?
Well, I generally have a purpose in mind. So if it happens to be turned into a pillow because it was originally a frame piece and somebody turned it into a pillow, that's definitely not what I have in mind. I just have the frame piece in mind. But I do have to have some idea of the project size and purpose, right? Mm-hmm. So, for instance, when I start something that's going to be a pin cushion, like you just said, okay, so it's got to be this size and it's got to have this kind of a look, because the shape of the pin cushion means that people are going to look at this side of the pin cushion, but not that side.
Yeah.
So, overall, yeah, you have to have the purpose in mind, and you have to have the dimensions of your piece in mind if you're doing anything other than a frame piece. A frame piece can be framed in any size, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. But if you're, unless I do a frame piece that's literally 8 by 10, fits into an 8 by 10 standard photo frame, which, I've done a few of those, but mainly I just decide on the design size, width-wise, more often than lengthwise, and I just create. There's no limitations. That's for the samplers and things like that. But if I'm doing a specific object, which I've done a lot of, needle rolls, boxes, the little buildings that I make for the gingerbread village, all those are three-dimensional objects. They have to have areas where you see the design more clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I always start with like you said, you were saying at the beginning, an outside dimension. You've got to have a shape.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That you fill in, right? Otherwise, It's one big, huge, open area. That's scary.
Yeah. Where do I start? Where do I end? I don't know. I'll sit here for 2 hours.
Yeah. You got to use your rational brain at first.
Yeah. Yeah. So then Victoria Sampler then evolves out of this shop, shop work. When do you make the break? And are you working out of your house, I assume?
Yes, actually, I think you're right. That I had to make a break, but it was actually a very easy break, because Fancy Works also evolved as I was evolving, and I maintained with her that I would never open a shop. She was very adamant about that.
Yeah, well.
And I could understand that. I just didn't want to. And what I loved was the designing end of things. So I liked working behind the scenes and the teaching end of things. And that complemented her business really well. She went into more quilting as well at a certain point. Mm. And so the shop evolved, had way more employees, became huge. And I was actually not nearly as needed in the last 2 or 3 years that I was there. I was working there maybe one day a week. It just gradually tapered off.
Oh, so that gave you your opening then without upsetting people.
It was gradual. And she was the most supportive person. She was the one who encouraged me the most, actually. She would say, "Oh, that's beautiful." And she would go on and on about something that, most people would look at and not really see it. But she had an eye that was similar to mine, I guess. And she was also more into the Victorian look, rather than the country look or the Americana look, right? There's a different kind of general look about my things than there would be about someone who is steeped in American history, for instance, and working beautiful designs, but just different colors, different elements, etc.
Yeah.
So she was very instrumental, and I call her she. Sorry, her name was Dawn. Dawn would be the first person to say, "Well, what about trying this?" Or, how about this fiber? Look what's just come in. She was just.
Oh, so you had in her a sounding board, and that's a real plus there.
It was huge, and I never. I think I really told her how much I appreciated it, but she had other business things to deal with as well. So. From my perspective, she was a godsend, and so were my coworkers, all very supportive, very nice people. I mean, the needlework industry in general deals with only nice people, as far as I'm concerned. Very few people that you think, oh, they're so down on things. Yeah, it's a great industry to be in.
So then you make that break, and you're in your house designing in a sea of threads and ground cloth. And
Well, it's a great picture that you're doing, and it's funny. It's very accurate, because I had to hire someone right at the very beginning when the Victoria Sampler actually was first kind of incubated. I couldn't do it all myself. My partner at the time, Richard, said, "You've got to remember that you need some help. And I was doing everything myself. And I said, yes, but she doesn't know how to do, and I don't know who to hire and all this stuff. So one of my last classes at Fancy Works, a lady came in and she was in every one of my classes. I noticed that. And she was looking really sad that day. And I said, well, this is my last class. Afterwards, I think I'll talk to her. Her name is Lisa. And Lisa kind of burst out crying. And she says, I just lost my job and I didn't like it to begin with. It was horrible. They treated me really badly. And I said, well, I'm looking for someone. Do you want to work with me? And her eyes just cleared up. The tears stopped. She was in shock. And she said, absolutely. So that was the beginning of our relationship. And that happened, I think, 22 years ago in July. And she still has the anniversary of that day. We celebrate that together because we've been together ever since. And I couldn't
still with you then. Okay.
Yep, still here. We've had lots of other employees, but she's the one who's been there through thick and thin, doing all the charting. Since she started, I taught her how to chart and how to write directions. And she's way better at it than I am, way more accurate. And,
so that's a huge plus for you as a designer then. You can create a design and then turn that over and move on to your next idea. Oh, that's huge.
It's huge. And it also means that I don't have to be so accurate. And I have to say that I am not accurate. So when it comes to creating charts and directions, you have to be accurate. You know, we actually are known for our accuracy, and that's not mine. It's Lisa's accuracy. She's the bookkeeper. She moves slowly and thoroughly and edits everything twice. And so without her, I don't think that I'd be in business. I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, boy. I bet she has stories to tell. Oh, we got to do a show with Lisa so she can just tell stories.
Uh-oh.
There was this one design, I'm telling you, I don't know what she was doing.
Well, it's actually gotten to the point where I do an awful lot of designing right on the linen. I don't even chart very well at all. I work out some of the charting on my computer now, but like at the very beginning, I would chart and chart and chart. Well, now, because she does it all, I start with a chart that looks approximate, very rough. And I start stitching right away. And that stitching is my designing. So I'm not really doing much charting anymore. And she gets my rough draft and says, nah, I'll start over. Thanks.
There we go. There we go. Well, I'm always interested in that design process. So you can just see it. You just make it happen with thread right on the cloth then.
That's right. That's my method. And I know it's more labor intensive, but seriously, I don't know how a designer can just do it on the computer without the texture and the ways that the colors actually fit together. Because you know very well, you look at your computer monitor and your monitor will look at it one way and my monitor will see a completely different color. You can't depend on the colors in your monitor, no matter how good your charting program is.
Right. Yeah.
So, I have to see it. I just have to.
Yeah. But there's very successful and good designers who can put it on the machine in black and white with grids, and you go to stitch it and it's beautiful. Yeah, they have that vision. So. Well,
their vision actually comes because the charting programs all have color. Mm-hmm. So they know their fibers. They know their DMC is mainly what they're using, or they know their weeks, or they know their other fibers really well, so their colors, and they've worked with them for a while, I suppose, and they can see on the computer their cross stitching. So if it's a cross stitch picture, I do work it out on my computer. But if it's specialty stitches that have to go together with other colors, the texture of the stitch itself is what you can't reproduce on your computer. Mm-hmm. So it's totally different. Like I know that, there are plenty of very successful cross-stitch designers that will get other people to stitch for them, and lucky them. I haven't been able to make that, jump from what it should look like in person to imagining what it might look like if I just put it on the computer and throw that on and somebody else stitches it. Mm-hmm.
So then when you get done with a design, then you have the model because you created it as you go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I'm also not saying that it's the only way or the best way for me. If I had a little bit more bravery, I might actually do some of that. Now that I'm getting older, I might have to. But on the other hand, the joy of being able to stitch something and watch it come to life, you can hear it in my voice. I can't let go of that either.
Well, hey, I don't blame you. That's, I mean, everybody has a different way, and that's what's so fun about talking to designers in these shows is the different approaches that people take to get to the same end result, which is a design that people want to stitch. And,
yeah, exactly. That's the ultimate thing.
Yeah. So then you have two other designers that you offer, Kathy and Linda. Where do they come into the picture?
Oh, Kathy worked for us for some time, and she was quite artistic herself. I've known Kathy much longer than that. She was a good friend, and she was a cross stitcher. And I said, "Oh, come and work for me." And it took her a while to trust that my company was actually going to be able to pay her, but she finally came on board. And I recommended that she do a little bit of drawing and try to do some cross stitching. And she loved country. Or I call it country, but it could be primitive or, that kind of look. So Kathy came to me doing that and doing a variety of things for the company. And I asked her to start doing some of these designs herself. And she loved her country designs. And so she created some beautiful little designs. And I think in the end, she had actually made about 70 or 80 designs. And then she decided that was all she was going to do. She was going to retire from my company. So she was not only working for my company, but in her spare time designing as well. And that, it kind of was enough. She's a few years older than me, and she decided to retire of all things.
What craziness is that?
Anyway, so that's where she came in. That was her choice. And then we had a number of other designers that wanted to have us basically sell their designs. So we would chart for them. We had a couple that didn't work out. And then we had another couple. And then Linda was the owner of a needlework shop in Florida. And she won one of my contests that I had done because she was so inventive. And her pieces just kept winning every time. People just wanted her design that she had made out of my design. So anyway, I said, would you like to try? And she loved the idea. And then she went to France. And after that, she had a lot of other things to do. So she really only managed, I think it was about 18 or so designs for us. But we still sell them. They're still popular. And we will still continue to sell Kathy's designs as well. But neither one of them is working for Victoria Sampler at all anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how that comes and goes in people's lives, and other things take them away, and you never know, they might come back at some point. But life ebbs and flows like that. And
it does. Yeah, I find it really odd that it doesn't ebb and flow like that for me. I'm just constantly excited. I can't stop. Gary, help.
Yeah, but it's. I mean, that's interesting because you have the chance with those two to experience them and offer what they have to offer, and then they move on to other things. And it sounds to me like the stream of ideas and creativity is yet to run out with you, and won't for a while. So you keep riding it. It's.
I guess so. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful thing. I'm also, of course, I have the business end of things, so there's that. Because this is my income. So if the business doesn't work anymore, I have to be ready to retire too. Not having my own personal pension means that I have, because I work for myself, I have to make sure that there are things in place that will continue to support me.
Right. Yeah. The and the business end of things sounds like you've been able to manage that so that you don't lose all your design time and all your creativity, because that happens to so many people in small businesses. They start out basically, I've got a hobby, I really like it, I'm going to make a business out of it, and then discover that they're spending countless hours doing ordering and book work and so on and so forth, and the creativity part just gets shoved to the back, and they lose out.
Yeah. I think that tends to happen no matter what. If you decide that you're going to do more than your share of running the business, and if you have someone who will support you and take over that management and or other jobs, and your business can sustain it, then being the designer is actually its own part and very important part of any of these needlework businesses. If you are the designer and you own the business, you have a tendency to want to, meddle in all the other. You have to keep your hands off and really prioritize your designing time. And that is hard because from my point of view too, I'm sure other designers will say the same thing. Oh no, my designing is just fun. So I'm going to do that in my spare time. We don't take it seriously enough, but it's what everything hinges on. So you have to prioritize
Right.
The designing as being one of the important things of your business plan.
Yeah. What is your day like? Do you actually block out time for design? How do you go about that?
Yes, I do. In a word, I generally early morning is my favorite time of the day. So I will come down into my offices and my studios, which is in my home. I live all upstairs, and everything business is downstairs, so it makes it really easy. It's a nice daylight basement, lots and lots of windows, etc. So it doesn't feel like I'm working in a basement.
So you've been able to avoid that overhead of a building.
Oh, definitely.
Oh, big plus.
I don't think this would have survived if I had had to pay rent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that, there wasn't enough, but it's basically this business is paying for this house. So it's the mortgage payment. So I am paying rent,
Right.
to myself, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so I come downstairs, I sit in front of my computer, and if I have a couple of hours in the morning, I can get myself set up, not just my computer, but I can get myself set up with the fabrics, doing the toss, all that. And I can then take an hour, maybe more, sometime during the day to do the actual stitching, designing part. But I have to get set up, right? And I need my whole morning time, space, in order to be able to feel like I've got the energy to get the project going. It's the beginning that requires all the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most of the decision making.
Yeah. So that's your creative time. You're okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I relate to that when a magazine editor and writing and editing. That's if I have to do the serious work, that's when it happens, is in the morning. Because as the day goes on, I'm just worse at it, and I end up redoing it the next morning because what I did was garbage. So
Right, exactly. And yes, and if something takes over, in other words, your brain is focused on something that is actually belongs to the day, I call it, then that will distract you from being able to function correctly. So I think early morning is good for that reason too, is you're not yet caught up in the day's problems and challenges and people.
Right. Right. It's also usually more quiet.
Very quiet. I love 6 o'clock in the morning. It's my favorite time.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful things can happen in those hours. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, talk about the techniques that you use in your designs, because you're not just cross stitch.
No, I'm not just cross stitch. In fact, at the very beginning, my Victoria samplers were very little cross stitch, almost none. It was almost all specialty stitches that combined together to produce a mood and a feeling. However, I became a little more brave, added a little more cross stitch. So now I'm pretty much half and half. There's meaning in the panels that I include in my samplers, and that meaning is best portrayed in a kind of pictorial sense, which cross stitch can give you.
Mm-hmm.
So I use cross stitch with enjoyment, lots of fun. I do a lot of miniature scenes. I find that I don't do an awful lot of large cross stitch areas. I'm pretty much most at home in creating immense amount of detail in a very small place.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Cross stitch. For some reason, I can suggest a scene with very few cross stitches. So that's apparently, many people have said this to me, that is a fun thing because they just have to do very few cross stitches and they get an effect as though it were a larger scene.
Yeah.
So that's a plus when you consider that my work is actually to do with samplers, right? So samplers were created originally in order for people to have a record of all of the stitches they've learned in their lifetime, because they weren't able to write them down at that time. So they would create the stitches on a long piece of linen that was fairly inexpensive to get, and they would create the stitches, and that way they'd have a record and they could reproduce those stitches later on for their household goods. So a sampler was then considered not a piece of art, but a really useful thing for not just for the individual householder, but also for people who were doing embroidery on clothing, etc. too, right?
Right.
So then the samplers turned into a thing that people learned in order to show that they were artistic. So, and it was less utilitarian and more fancy. So all those sampler stitches are still around. Like when I started doing sampler stitches, particularly the cut work like hardanger or drawn thread or pulled work, all those textural things were used to make kind of a lacy work on their sheets of people of high standing would have sheets that were heavily embroidered, hand embroidered. And so those stitches are all still alive. And it was my mission to bring them to our modern world so that they wouldn't be lost. That was what I originally started out with. Mm-hmm. So having those stitches at the forefront of my samplers was important to me. It still is very important to me. And I'm in the process now of helping people learn those stitches by starting a Victoria Sampler Academy.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Enlighten me.
It's brand new. It's the first time I've talked about it to anyone. So there you are. It's a scoop.
All right.
I just actually put the finishing touches on the very first few courses. They're based on the Beyond Cross Stitch learning kits that I have on my website already, but they are all videoed. So every part of the stitches that are used in the Beyond Cross Stitch series are completely explained. Anyway, so that's what it's based on. So far, the courses, there are 3 courses. And one extra one, which teaches people who only work on Aida to work on linen. So there's an introductory course to linen, and then after that there are 30 courses basically, all done in on the Academy, so that you can take them, and they're all free.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, the thing is that many people say, "Oh, I could never do that," right? Especially the specialty stitches that require some cut work.
Yeah, no, I struggle with that so much. Yes, you can. You can, and people can do amazing things. They just got to dig in.
Yes, but there's also the difficulty when a person is sitting at home, they have no clue where to start. How do you get to, like, there might not be a guild in there and where they live. You know, they might not have any friends that they can call on. So this way they can learn with me, basically talking them through it, and then you get more confidence. The more you do, the more confident you get. So I thought, well, start at the very beginning where people want to start, because they've been cross stitching. That's why it's called Beyond Cross Stitch.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So this is available now, this Academy?
No, but I'm just putting the final touches on it this week, and I believe that the Academy will be available by the end of next week, and it's called the VictoriaSamplerAcademy.com. So when I get it set up, that's what the site will be.
VictoriaSamplerAcademy.com.
Yep.
All right.
I'm pretty excited, as you can imagine.
I can tell, and I don't blame you.
Well, it gives people who are difficult, they find that all these specialty stitches confusing, difficult, or they think that they're difficult and they're not, a chance to try them and to learn. And there's no pressure whatsoever in all of this whole academy. It's just there so that you can go from the most simple things progressively, slowly, but surely to the most complicated cut work.
Mm-hmm. And for folks who are listening, then I'll put a link to that, VictoriaSamplerAcademy.com. I'll put a link in the show notes at WeTalkFiber.com. And if it isn't working, just come back in a few days. But at least it'll be there for the longer term so that people can check it out. That's great. Very exciting.
Very exciting. I'm very excited, and I certainly hope there will be a few people checking us out.
Well, I hope so too. That sounds like a great idea. Tell me about, I don't know what it is about this that fascinates me. You talk about people moving from Aida to linen. And I mean, I've said this on numerous shows. I just struggle to understand why that is difficult, because to me it's just a grid. It doesn't matter what the grid is. So what is that? What is it that you do to help people do that?
Well, first of all, I show, which is difficult to do unless you actually have a moving picture. So the video is just showing is very important. But there are tricks, and I think what most people imagine will be their difficulty is because instead of seeing 4 grid separated with a little bit of fabric, there's the 4 holes with a little bit of fabric in between. So they know where the cross goes on an Aida fabric. They can see it clearly. There is a square, right, and a square beside it, bounded by these holes. So they're looking for holes. And I think that when you start thinking about linen, you see a whole bunch more holes, number one. And they're teenier, right? They're not so it becomes very confusing to the eye because you're so used to looking for holes. So I teach them how to see better. So once you start stitching on linen, you will find that going over 2 fabric threads is just as easy as going to the next hole, but that needs to happen. And once it happens, it's like optical illusion. You can't see it until you practice it, and when you practice it, it'll suddenly happen. You'll see it better. And
so that's the crux of why people struggle with that then.
I believe so.
Because I mean, I've done some Aida, but I not a lot. So I guess maybe I never got that habitual thing in my head. Maybe that's why I always struggle to see the difference. And I didn't have, and I got onto linen, and I just never saw the problem. So okay, I can start to appreciate if people have done a lot of cross stitch on Aida, where those holes, there's no question where the holes are.
Yes. Okay,
that helps me.
That's good. I remember looking to see what the history of this Aida is, and it started around the turn of the 20th century, so it was around 10 or something like that, by the Zweigart Company, of all things, in Germany. They saw so many people starting to want to cross stitch, and they had the linen, but people were having some trouble, or they just thought, hey, let's make something for the crosses to fit on. And they created this Aida cloth, and it's not Aida, just everyone. It's Aida, although it was named after the opera by them. And I believe it was called Aida for a while, but now it's called Aida. In any case, they started producing this and mass producing it, and it became the most common cloth for cross stitch for at least half a century, if not more. So I'm not saying it was supplanted linen, but it was the most common and cheapest cotton cloth for people to use for their cross stitch. So then now those of us who have been used to looking in a store, we look for Aida. We just, that's what we see. It's available. So use that. So I think linen then made a comeback. And around the time that I started stitching and designing, I believe that linen was becoming more and more popular during that time because the background is much smoother and less dotted with little holes.
Yes.
And it's lovely to stitch on. It feels so good in your hand.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. But see, that's interesting there because if you look at Aida, when you're putting a cross over that, you have that that body of cloth underneath the cross that doesn't collapse and gives you a nice support that you wouldn't have with linen, where linen, you got to be careful you don't collapse your threads and that kind of thing. So there's some real pluses with Ada in terms of stitching.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It has a stiffener in it. That was one of the reasons they didn't need to have a frame. In fact, you put Ada on a hoop and you really get some hoop marks.
Yes.
So because the stiffener also shifts then too. So the stiffness of the Ada was one of the big pluses of using Ada. And it's still like that. I'm not saying that Ada is less popular than linen. It's still the most popular, believe it or not, of the ground fabrics that people do counted work on, and mainly counted cross stitch.
Well, yeah, and there's so many colors available now, so many options that it's almost hard to not use it, quite frankly.
That's right. You have to actually make the effort to stitch on linen. But remember that Ada itself is not a traditional fabric. It was created for the mass market.
Right.
So I believe that if you are going to bring back specialty stitches that people used to do through the centuries to make all these beautiful hangings and clothing, etc., you would probably want to include linen in your repertoire. Yeah,
it does give more flexibility in terms of where the needle can go and not go. Yeah.
Absolutely. I certainly wouldn't want to do my samplers on Ada.
Yeah. All right, Thea, we have to stop.
Oh, no, I was just getting going, Gary.
I know. Well, see, and I've got more questions, so that means you have to come back. That's how it works.
That sounds fun.
We put you on the list and you come back and then we do more. And yes.
Sounds like fun. We've got lots of things to talk about still.
Yes. Well, thoroughly enjoyed it. See, I told you we could do an hour. Easy.
Easy. It certainly means that you have asked many very interesting questions. So you've been doing this for a while, and I think you're doing a great job educating and entertaining people.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's always fun to talk with people like you, that all the things you've done. And I learned things once again, that's a plus. So, all right, folks, thanks for listening. VictoriaSampler.com is the website, and then coming up soon, VictoriaSamplerAcademy.com for videos. Oh boy, that's going to be fun. Yes. All right. Thanks for listening, and thanks, Thea, for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.